All right, here we go. Start this 5 o'clock hour. We will have Sam Mays, former Oklahoma State player, who is on the Sports Animal in Tulsa. And he's got a story to tell about some things that have happened to him, but also the Oklahoma State-Baylor game coming up this weekend in the Big 12 Championship. I'm looking forward to that one. There's not one that I'm not. I think Michigan will hammer Iowa, but you never know. Obviously, Alabama and Georgia, and I think Georgia might have their whatever they want, but then again, you never know. And then on top of that, look forward to even that Houston-Cincinnati game for the American Championship with those two future Big 12 teams. We're now joined, he's one of the great writers in the country, Gary Myers. He has written a book along with Robert Griffin III, former Baylor Heisman Trophy quarterback, Surviving Washington. The last time, Gary Myers, welcome to the show again. Thank you very much. He's authored books before. The last time we had Robert on, it was a media session for the game he was about to broadcast. And I asked him because Washington had just gone through some more things that had happened within the organization. And I asked him about, did it surprise him, Gary, that they had all this stuff come out? I think the John Gruden thing was even going on because he had been a part of it. I know sometimes it was tough on him. When did this start between the two of you guys? When did you start communicating back and forth about a book?
Hi, David. It started like a year ago, September, that we both shared a literary agent who encouraged us to speak to each other once Robert expressed an interest in doing a book. And, I knew him a little bit. I will not lie to you and tell you that I knew him. He didn't know me by name or anything like that. I'd been in a bunch of his games over the years, especially when he was in Washington. But when I spoke to him on the phone about the book project, it was really the first time I'd spoken to him one-on-one. And, we instantly got along. I was at that Seattle-Washington playoff game in 2000, after the 2012 season that, was the key moment in his career. And we talked a lot about that. And I think that he was impressed that I knew so much about what happened that day and that I came to the project with a lot of knowledge about his career and obviously about the NFL, having covered it for 40 years. So we talked for about a month and he decided he wanted to go ahead with the project. And we've been working on it ever since.
Gary, the drafting of RG3 is almost kind of this flashpoint for the Washington organization, in which maybe some of the things that had been Dan Snyder had been dysfunctional with coaches for a little bit, but what was it about his arrival that kind of maybe helped shine a little more light or kind of exploded what was already an organization that was not well run?
That's a great question, and I have a good answer for you on that one. Daniel Snyder wanted to trade up in the 2012 draft to make a splash and get Robert, and Mike Shanahan did not. And although Snyder had promised Shanahan complete control of the football operations, you know how that works, and Shanahan had gotten off to, you know how that works with Snyder at least, Shanahan had got off to a bad start in his first couple of years in Washington. And I guess at that point, he just said, okay, you're the boss. If this is what you want, go ahead and make the trade and I'll try to make it work. And it worked pretty well for 2012 season until he suffered the torn ACL towards the end of the playoff game against Seattle. He shouldn't have been in that long, because he re-injured his knee early in the first quarter, and it was pretty clear to see from anybody who was in that stadium, I guess except for Mike Shanahan, that he could barely walk, no less run and protect himself. And to this day, I don't know what Shanahan was thinking. I know that years later, he came out and said that he should have taken him out of the game, but he didn't. And, Robert has speculated in the book about whether it was just, a continuing power struggle between Shanahan and Snyder, and Shanahan saying, this is the guy you want? Okay, I'm going to give him to you. And the doctors had cleared him to go back in the game. But again, anybody who was watching that game could see with their own eyes, You didn't need to be an orthopedist like Dr. James Andrews, who was on the Redskins sideline that day. You didn't need to be somebody of that stature to realize the guy was not capable of playing, no less capable of playing at the level that he had played that season. And it resulted in the second torn ACL of his career. He had the first one at Baylor, obviously, and he was never the same after that.
Gary, I remember watching that game. I have never yelled at a TV like I yelled at that day. I mean, and not just as like a fan yell, but I mean, like, get him out of the game, just screaming at the TV. I could not understand it for the life of me, and obviously nobody else can still really understand. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. Was that painful for Robert to rehash, or you think therapeutic for him?
Well, you know, it's funny because when I had that introductory phone call with him, I told him that I thought it was the worst case of coaching malpractice in terms of a coach looking out for the health of a player that I had ever witnessed in 40 years covering the NFL. And nothing that I've seen since then has come close to that. And see, the part where Robert knows that he is somewhat culpable here is he could have easily gone to Shanahan and just say, Coach, I just can't do it. Right. You can see I can't run. I can't protect myself. I can't get out of the way. But he explains that away by saying he was a 22-year-old kid. The adrenaline was flowing. He felt an obligation to his team, and he wasn't going to be the one to make the decision. He needed the most renowned sports orthopedist in the world and a two-time Super Bowl winning head coach to, as he said, be the adults in the room and say, hey, kid, take a seat. We're putting Kirk Cousins in. And he said he wouldn't have argued with that. He wanted to stay in the game. And when they didn't tell him that he couldn't, he didn't take himself out. It's perplexing because you can see in the first, they went up 14-0 in that game. And if you remember the game, he got hurt running to his right and went down. It was a non-contact injury. Stayed in the game through a touchdown pass. I think it was 2 plays later. So up 14-0, probably still at least 5 minutes to go in the first quarter, maybe a little bit more. But then when you watched him play after that, he just couldn't move.
Yeah.
And I think they had more offense on those first 2 drives, maybe twice as much. The numbers were staggering. The first 2 drives compared to the rest of the game in terms of yardage. They did absolutely nothing the rest of the game offensively.
Yep.
And it was a very disturbing situation. I thought sitting there in the press box at FedEx Field watching that game, I thought it was cruel. That's the best word I have to describe what I was watching. It was cruel. It was almost as if he was being punished and said, no, you have to stay in the game. Now, that's not what happened, but it appeared to be that way because it seemed to be such a clear-cut decision that he had to be taken out for his own good.
Gary, we have obviously had many interviews with him along the way, and we're there the night he was drafted and all that. But I would trade some text messages with him. It appeared to me that eventually who undermined – now, Robert had an ego, and he could have been known also as a prima donna, and he was getting a lot of attention. He was a superstar, a rock star. But at the same time, there did seem to be something within the organization that started to come out about him, about a lot of things with him, football or otherwise. Who did he get into that? Will that be in the book?
Yeah, I don't know that he has. I think he was able to connect the dots on some things. I don't want to give away too much because I really want you. I want your listeners to buy the book, and that's still RG3 territory in Waco for sure. But you're right, David. There was a lot of stuff that was being leaked to the media, and he has a pretty good idea how that was happening, and he doesn't hold back in the book. Pointing the fingers. I'll just leave it at that.
I'll remember you could start to hear some things. It might have been the next year after we came back from off season and all the surgery. But Brian Mitchell and guys that had been like fawning on him, they just turned on him in a hurry. Like someone within the locker room or again within the management And again, look forward to the book. The book's coming out. It's in August of next year. Robert Griffin III with Gary Myers, Surviving Washington. Robert's put something out on Twitter as well, and we're talking to Gary Myers about the book right now.
Gary, was the time kind of now that Robert is a broadcaster? He's leaving his playing career behind. Was this the right time for him to finally kind of unburden himself of all this information?
Well, I'll tell you this, that when we decided to do the book, or more plainly, when he decided to do the book, it was early in the 2020 season when he was, Lamar Jackson's backup in Baltimore. And the thought hadn't crossed his mind that he would not be playing football in 2021. So I just think he felt it was time to tell what happened in Washington, both that involved his career, his playing career, and a lot of the sexual harassment stories that came out in the last year and a half. And he has some pretty strong things to say about what he saw and experienced there. If it was up to Robert, he'd still be playing. And I know he still wants to play. Whether sitting out the season, just like he did the 2017 season, whether sitting out this time will lead to him saying, I'm done, I wouldn't count on that. He won't be 32 until January, and he still feels very strongly that he can play effectively in the NFL. I think at some point he's got to get realistic that he went through what's now going to be a complete season with lots of quarterback injuries and guys that, are not considered in his league, at least how he was early in his career, are getting opportunities on NFL rosters, and he's not. He did work out for the Panthers, which was his only workout, and he did that over the summer and felt that he had a good chance to be signed there, and it didn't happen. And then when Sam Darnold got hurt, they brought back Cam Newton. Even though Robert had a strong connection with Matt Rule, obviously he didn't play for him at Baylor, but because Robert stayed close to the program, he and Rule had developed a relationship over the years, and he thought that would work in his favor if they needed a quarterback. But, when it came down to it, they brought back Cam Newton, which I think a lot of people were surprised about. But he's been staying in shape, and he throws all the time. He's always working out, and he's hoping to get another shot. Truthfully, and I've told him this, I think he should count his blessings that he can walk away from the game, literally walk away from the game despite, 2 ACL surgeries, and he's got young kids and he can play with them. He's not hampered at all. He's very, very well regarded at ESPN, just maybe to his broadcasting career. And I think the arrow is definitely pointing up for him as a network broadcaster. And if he was to ask me, occasionally he does, I would say stick with TV, because what's the best that's going to happen? He'll get signed as a backup on a crappy team, and maybe he'll get, if the quarterback gets hurt, he'll get a chance to play and be set up for failure because he won't be on, a good team. Maybe he'll get signed by a good team. Who knows? But I think the odds of that are dwindling, just based on some time going by.
Yeah, he's been a great hire. ESPN's won, and he's won as well. And he's had some pretty nice games as well. And it seems like he's on his way, like so many other former players who are either studio analysts or broadcasters, on their way to making a ton of money doing that with his being outspoken and his personality as well. How much did he say that he's told us this? How much did he discuss on how he could have done things better?
Yeah, I think that he feels that his relationship with Mike Shanahan was rocky from the start. Then they got off to a 3-6 start that year, and then they started winning, and everybody was getting along. I think he feels that he rushed back for the start of his second season, 9 months after ACL surgery. When Adrian Peterson came back and ran for 2,000 yards, he had his injury in mid-December and was back by September. Robert had his early January, and he was back by September. But so I think, the precedent had been set. I can't remember whether Peterson was before or after Robert, but we know guys can come back from ACL surgeries fairly quickly. I think he realizes now that he came back too fast, that he just wasn't ready. Contrary to what people think, he wasn't coming back because of some sneaker contract where the model was all in for week one, and people thought he was motivated to come back just so the commercial looked good, which is ludicrous. I mean, what people need to understand about Robert, and I'm sure you guys do, he's a really bright guy and very aware of his surroundings and what people are thinking about him or saying about him. And I think certainly more often than not, he does the right thing. But I think he put an inordinate amount of pressure on himself to be ready for the first game of the 2013 season. And that probably wasn't the right thing to do.
No, I don't think he was ready either. And I'm a lifelong Washington fan, and so I remember when they beat Dallas. Paul and I were at the game at AT&T Stadium, Gary, when they hammered the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, and Jerry Jones after the game said, "My God, we got to deal with this. We got to deal with this guy for the next 10 years." And then, of course, it ended very soon after that. It was sad to see the injury and all that. Yeah, he's always been great to us, not just because we covered Baylor, but we've talked to him many times about some tough topics, and I think there was a lot of times misconception about him, and then sometimes he's admitted he could have done some things differently as well. I can't wait to read the book, Gary, and I know you're doing a a bunch of different interviews are on the way, and good luck with it, and I'm glad you're involved because I know what you do and what you represent.
Well, David, thank you so much for saying that, and I think all the Baylor fans will. I'll just close by telling you this: he has a very strong emotional attachment to Baylor. He has nothing but good things to say. He was very honored when they put the statue up in front of the new stadium, and he's very proud of the contributions he made there, helping Baylor get the football program, back into an area of prominence, and. He just really enjoyed and embraced his years at Baylor.
When he had his pro day, Gary, everybody was here. I mean, it was live on the NFL Network, and that's not the first time. And Jaworski was live on ESPN and NFL. And I remember when Daniel Snyder, there was a barricade, the little plastic fence or so. And I remember when Snyder came up, Tony Wiley, who was a guy we knew when he was with the Cowboys. You know Tony. And introduced, you could see Snyder was beaming. And I don't know if you could ever see Shanahan beaming much, but was that a moment on the campus of Baylor. It was amazing.
Yeah, and his agent had advised him not to throw at his pro day, and because he did not throw at the combine, and by that time everybody knew that Washington was going to take him, but he felt an obligation to the Baylor receivers who would also be working out that day for the scouts. He felt an obligation to be the guy throwing to them and to try to make them look good. And I know some people might hear me say that and go, yeah, right. But that's really how he felt, because he had nothing to gain personally by working out at his pro day. He could have easily canceled his participation in that, but he really felt he'd be leaving his teammates down. And I think that's the kind of guy he was. In college, his reputation was different in the NFL, which is, a much tougher audience in the locker room. And I'm sure there was a lot of veteran players who resented the attention this 22-year-old kid from Texas was getting before he stepped on the field. He had 1 million endorsements before he even played a game. And, the team hadn't won in a while. And all of a sudden this kid is, put on this pedestal. So he had to win over his teammates, and I think by the end of the season he had. It's just everything that happened after that was bad pretty much in Washington. And then, he never really did anything in Cleveland, and then he hardly got on the field in Baltimore. And now he's in the TV booth and has a great story to tell about his journey.
Thank you, Gary. Always a Hall of Fame writer, and Gary Myers, the author, co-author with Robert Griffin III. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate your time. Armstrong, do you have that graphic of the book cover with Robert Griffin? I think I sent that to you. Simon & Schuster, by the way, part of it. There it is, Robert Griffin III with Gary Myers, Surviving Washington. And you want to go to RG3's Twitter feed if you want. He kind of has a little bit of a tease on there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to that Seattle game. I'm glad to hear somebody like Gary Myers, who's seen, thousands more games than I have across the sports landscape, say the same thing that I felt that day watching. That was unbelievable to watch them just continue trotting him out there. I'm basically on one leg and just over and over. I can't even put into words how angry I was. People watch sports and they may get angry at an outcome or at a play or whatever, but that was a personal anger of what are you doing to this guy? It was so obvious the pain that he was in, and everybody knew it, and they just kept putting him back. I just cannot believe they did that. I still to this day cannot believe they did that.
I can remember I can still close my eyes.
And they could have won. They could have won that game.
Going back inside the 10, he dropped back and his leg just snapped. You know what I mean? Go ahead, Paul. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of players sometimes I can do it, coach, and you go back in for a series or so, and then the coach goes, "Man, you're killing us here. You got to get out." And that's what I didn't understand about Mike Shanahan is did he not just, as much as he wanted him back in and James Andrews cleared him and all these different things, did he not go, it's not really helping right now, and Kirk Cousins was the backup, the guy you wanted in the first place, put him in the game.
They could have won.
They were up 14-0. They absolutely had Seattle early on the ropes, and then, of course, Seattle was good too. But, yeah, they could have won. Dr. William Andrews, who we've talked to on the show back in the day, he's like the epitome of
James Andrews.
James Andrews, excuse me. William Andrews, the former running back, the epitome of orthopedic surgeons back in the kind of like the guy that did all of it. And that was a sad thing. It's like a boxer who is absolutely out on his ass and his feet, and you don't throw in the towel.
Yeah, no, it's basically watching somebody get concussed and then go out there and just keep ramming his head into the wall, and then nobody does anything about it. I mean, that was one of the most. Shanahan should have been fired that day right after the game. Yeah. He absolutely deserved it. That was coaching malpractice to the furthest extent. By the way, I did want to make mention, and I think you